Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I am Matt Vallière, the Executive Director of the Patients' Rights Action Fund. I'm a Worcester native and a call volunteer EMS first responder in Central Massachusetts. I'll be your host today. For the benefit of some people with disabilities, I'm an early 40s man of color, dark wavy hair, dark beard, olive complexion, wearing a pink checked button-down shirt and a sky blue blazer in front of a flower print background. This can be a difficult topic. Suicidal thoughts or actions, including in older adults and people with life-threatening disability, are a sign of extreme distress and should not be ignored. If you or someone you know needs immediate help, please call or text the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 988. Our broken medical system is driven by a profits before people structure. People are not getting the care they deserve, and choices are often artificially limited by financially motivated players. Too often, medical professionals and society on the whole view the lives of people with disabilities and older adults as less worth living, less worthy of care, scarce medical resources, and healthcare dollars. Better off dead. We have three experts here for you today who will provide our position in opposition to the twin assisted suicide bills in the Massachusetts legislature, H 2505 and S 1486. First, there's Ellen Leigh, who is a disability rights advocate with United Spinal Association, who lives with a spinal cord disorder and uses a power wheelchair. She opposes assisted suicide in her efforts to overcome health inequities and medical bias. Ellen volunteers with Second Thoughts Massachusetts, as she recognizes assisted suicide as a deadly form of discrimination against disabled people. John Kelly is a Boston-based disability rights activist and writer, a longtime member of Not Dead Yet, and director of Second Thoughts Massachusetts, a disability rights advocacy organization against assisted suicide. As someone commonly referred to as paralyzed from the neck down from a spinal cord injury, John was influenced by the writings of Paul Longmore about the right to die cases in the 80s and 90s, people with similar disabilities who were put on the fast track to death while being denied the resources to live. Dr. John Rhee is a board-certified physician in neuro-oncology and palliative care at Dana-Farber, and he is an instructor of neurology at Harvard Medical School in Boston. A little bit of housekeeping. We will take questions via the Q&A function. Please type the question, your name, and media outlet, and if for a specific panelist, please indicate that. For any further media requests, please contact Bill Pierce at wpierce, that's P-I-E-R-C-E, at apcoworldwide.com, A-P-C-O worldwide.com. The session will be recorded, and we will share the link on our platforms afterwards. Panel and hosts, for anyone who is not speaking, please do keep your mic on mute. If you can benefit from closed captions, please use that function in Teams. If you move your cursor around the upper toolbar, there's a more options. If you look at language and speech in the drop down, it says show live captions, and you would click that if you need them. Okay, so Ellen, thanks for starting us off today. Please take it away.
Okay, thanks, Matt. Yes, so initially I actually supported this kind of bill, this legislation, but my due diligence, I wanted to understand it better. Initially I thought, oh, it's a choice. What harm could there be? People who don't want it don't have to choose it. Well, the more that I studied, the more that I learned about this, I realized that it's really all about disability. For example, Oregon, the first state that passed this type of legislation, the top 5 reasons in Oregon for people citing their reasoning for wanting this, it involves depending on others, feeling like a burden, shame, loss of dignity. This is what I hear all the time by the proponents. Well, we all have inherent dignity, and we don't lose it when we become ill and disabled. So bringing dignity into this only increases feelings of shame and burden for people choosing to live. And I'm very concerned, terrified really, about the implications of these bills in the real world, not in the sort of perfect way that it's written, even though in the legislation, when it plays out in the real world, it's going to harm vulnerable, marginalized people like me. It cannot protect me. There is no way. And there are massive consequences. people are already being harmed in other states and jurisdictions where this has been passed. And especially now, when you look at all the cuts on the table, all the things that are being threatened to be taken away, fighting for services like PCA, personal care attendant services. I've had to come to the State House in Massachusetts twice in the past year, just trying to fight to save these kinds of services, much less trying to push for more. We're trying to keep the basics like Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid, housing, food, fighting for equity and inclusion. It is essential, it is vital to keep assisted suicide out of healthcare. It doesn't belong in healthcare. It's about ending life, not saving life. This is not, it doesn't belong in healthcare. There's really no possible way to legalize assisted suicide. Healthcare is about death care, ending people's lives. And people like myself, people with serious disabilities, who are older, who are ill, need protections. And so this is not, especially not the time to push this bill through. Another thing that I have come to understand, I'm fortunate that I have a supportive family. Well, not everybody does. I don't know what I would do if I didn't have a supportive family, if I didn't have an accessible, affordable place to live. It's rare. It's like a miracle to find that. And now these things are potentially being taken away. So it's not a real choice when you don't have the supports and services that you need to live in the community. What's the choice if you're choosing between being homeless, being unhoused, or living in a nursing home? These are things that are not real choices. So when society makes people who are ill, disabled, older feel like a burden, then that's not a real choice. And for example, I had a very terrifying experience when I was in septic shock and I was trying hard not to die. And I was told by the ER doctor that I was very ill and might die. And then I felt pressured to get a DNR. As sick as I was at the time, I recall being shocked that I was essentially asked if I wanted to live. I can't imagine why there would be any other reason for this other than a presumed low quality of life because of my disability and the fact that my wheelchair was looming large in that room. I was physically weak and it was hard to breathe, but I was able to assert my desire to have life support. And I'm really haunted by the thought of what might have happened if I hadn't been able to counter this attitude that my life was not worth saving. With doctors in the healthcare system that's already, profit driven, broken, overwhelmed, and filled with biases. We all have them. I have ableist biases too, unfortunately. But when I'm most vulnerable, these are these come to the fore and they could threaten my life and the lives of other people. So we need protection. If it with assisted suicide bills in place, people that have biases may be deciding whether I live or whether I die. And I'm concerned about the effect on the doctor-patient relationship because it harms that very important relationship. I want my doctors fighting for me, not ending my life, not questioning whether my life is worth living. I don't want.
Should I?
I'm sorry, John. Anyway, I don't want doctors thinking this, raising this as an option. Um, Physicians have tremendous power and influence over people, especially people who are sick. And when I'm exhausted, I might not have the fight in me. I might not have been able to save my life if I'm just too worn out from justifying my existence. And that is a real concern. I could see that people just say yes, and that's not a real choice.
Thank you so much, Ellen. I couldn't help but think of some of the folks in other legal jurisdictions that did have some of their stuff cut, would have ended up homeless, and they were explicitly opting for assisted suicide because they didn't want to be homeless. And like this is not an addition unto autonomy. It's sold as that But as you said, in the real world, not some kind of utopia land in which we don't live, but in the real world, this does have dramatic and deadly consequences to people.
Okay, my name is John Kelly, and I am Communications Director for Not Dead Yet, the leading disability rights opposition to the legalization of assisted suicide and any policies regarding quality of life judgments that unfairly discriminate against people who are disabled. So I myself am commonly referred to as paralyzed from the neck down, and there are a slew of movies in which the character with my disability begs for relief from earthly existence and wants to be euthanized. And I reject that totally because we believe that the state must not sponsor people's suicides because it puts pressure on people who want to live to die in order to save insurers money, to meet family expectations. I mean, we have people who can't get care, but then they get offered assisted suicide. And we are making a social justice argument that we are unfortunately vulnerable to these kind of quality of life judgments. So I was in the hospital in 2018, and the doctor approached my brothers and asked to about my quote unquote quality of life, and they knew where this conversation was going without saying the words. If they had said, "Oh, it's very poor, he wishes he had died in his accident, and it's very sad case, but he just isn't the man he used to be." And there are examples out there like the Indiana hunter who broke his neck, and he was brought out of sedation, told he wouldn't be able to hold his baby that had yet to be born. And so he died, but that baby would have known he was holding him because the baby could feel it. So I'm just appalled by these efforts to pass assisted suicide that throws whole populations under the bus. And our bottom line is the state must not sponsor people's suicides.
Thank you, John. I couldn't
Matt?
agree. Although you can't hear me, I can hear you just fine. We're grateful for your commentary.
Am I on?
Mm-hmm. If you're here, I'll type it in the chat here. Okay.
Yes.
Dr. Rhee, it's all yours. Thank you so much, John Kelly.
Thank you. So I'm a board-certified neurologist, hospice and palliative medicine physician, and a neuro-oncologist. And as a disclaimer, I speak for myself and not on behalf of my institutions. As a Massachusetts physician, I strongly oppose the Massachusetts End of Life Options Act, which would legalize physician-assisted suicide in Massachusetts. I always feel that patient stories are the most powerful, and so I start with one. One of my patients the other day, in the face of his terminal pancreatic cancer, asked me genuinely, wouldn't it be better if he were to die? With openness, I asked him why he was thinking about him, and he, let's call him Bill for anonymity, told me because he didn't want to be a burden on his daughter. When I continued also with openness to ask him what he meant by that, he shared with me that he wanted his daughter to live her life and not to have to worry about him. And when I asked him if there was something more that he wanted to say, he shared with me that he was afraid of what the end of life may look like. It's been my experience that patients come to us in moments of deep suffering, and a serious illness deeply affects one's identity. And in this context, the pleas for physician-assisted suicide are based on the fears of loss of autonomy, inability to engage in enjoyable activities, and a loss of dignity, because really palliative care is very good at treating pain. But in the face of such suffering, our immediate reaction is to want to terminate the suffering. However, suffering comes from a fracturing of a person's identity. It consists of physical aspects of pain and the emotional distress of coping with a diagnosis. But I have also witnessed that the most intense part of the suffering of a serious illness is the existential distress that a patient is faced with. Who am I? Am I simply a sum of my physical abilities? What our patients are asking for when they bring up the question of assisted suicide is not for us to prescribe a pill that they can then ingest to end their lives. What they are asking for is for us to hold the suffering with them, to not abandon them when they express this cry for help. I held the suffering with Bill, and I spoke to him about how, even in his state of illness, he can still be a father to his daughter, and that allowing her to care for him continues to help her also grow in her identity as a daughter, and even in the virtues of patience, love, and compassion. And I told Bill that even in his illness, he can grow deeper in his bonds with those around him. Bill went on to die a peaceful death. His last few weeks were spent with his family who cared deeply for him, and those weeks were filled with important memories that the whole family still holds. For Bill, it was not about prescribing a pill that ends his life. It was about accompaniment. It was about sitting with him in his fears, because as any good friend does, when we share some of our suffering with others, if our friend is able to hold that space with us, with that love, care, and compassion, then somehow just speaking about that suffering makes our burden lighter. And somehow knowing that this person will be there for me, I regain a sense of hope that I can still look forward to every moment as something precious and deeply meaningful. I can see that even if the end is coming near, I can still live the remaining moments to the fullest. It has been my experience as a physician that passing of the assisted suicide law in Vermont has led many people to question as to whether physician-assisted suicide is the right choice. I would even say that passing the law also creates an underlying pressure to die. This is seen in the case of Canada, where in certain jurisdictions, greater than 1 in 10 people die from euthanasia. And there is now a push for further expanding this to people with dementia. After a serious diagnosis such as cancer, patients are being offered euthanasia in a deeply trying moment. We should ask ourselves, is this a society I want to live in, where there is a subtle pressure to end my life in the face of a serious illness, where in the face of a new serious diagnosis, in this deeply vulnerable and emotional state, I am immediately presented with an option to end my life? And when this is presented to me under the authority of a physician, I deeply worry about the most vulnerable members of our society, those who have impaired communication due to brain lesions, those with disabilities, communities of color, where subtle social and economic pressures will push people towards physician-assisted suicide. This is why the National Council on Disability has rejected assisted suicide, and I think we should not be naive. There are and will be economic pressures at play here. It is far cheaper to end someone's life than to support them through their illness. What we need more is investment in end-of-life care to support families with physical care at home. What I see in my patients with neurologic illness is more need for supports at home. To pass a bill that promotes assisted suicide, unfortunately, would make that battle even more difficult because of the further economic reasons not to invest in patients' care needs. We need to invest more, not less, in palliative and supportive care, where clinicians can sit and help patients through these existential questions and still find meaning and purpose in their everyday lives. I also worry about how people make decisions based on prognoses, which can also be very different for each individual, because prognosis is about averages, and the individual in front of me is an individual human being, not a statistic. The clinician can never be a part of hastening a patient's death, for that will cause detrimental consequences to patient trust in physicians. The clinician should be the foundation upon which a patient can share their suffering and vulnerability, where they can pick up pieces of themselves in the face of a serious diagnosis and recognize that they are more than their parts, that I am Bill, a father of a fiercely loving daughter, a husband to a loving wife, that I am funny, but have a fierce sense of duty and service to my family. And to Bill, I say, I will not abandon you in your existential suffering. I will never terminate you as a person. Rather, I will walk side by side with you as your physician until the very end. Thank you.
That's beautiful, John. Thank you so much. You know, I myself took care of our dad when he was passing away from brain cancer, and it was one of the great honors of my life. And to your point earlier, you know, so again, my name is Matt Vallière. I'm not here to take a position on the moral implications of someone killing themselves. It's a decision anyone can legally make. And believe me, there's no shortage of lethal means. I go to overdose, suicide attempt, and threat calls regularly for my local fire department, where I'm a call volunteer. We're not here to change anything in a person's right to refuse care while receiving adequate palliation. With this public policy, though, you have to ask, could this hurt someone? Could someone be coerced? Do the supposed benefits outweigh the harms? When most people hear assisted suicide, they think of terminal disabilities like inoperable stage 4 metastatic cancer. But when you look at the underlying conditions listed in the data from legal states like Oregon, there are conditions that are not life-threatening with treatment, like diabetes, HIV, and other illnesses that include anorexia, arthritis, and a hernia. My dad has diabetes. He's on insulin. He lives here in Massachusetts. What if he's having a dark moment and opts to get off his insulin? He would then have a 6-month prognosis, which is the litmus test to get lethal drugs under this bill. There are confirmed cases of this happening in states that have legalized this terrible public policy. Proponent physicians and lawyers have been overtly arguing that patients who do not have medical conditions that currently render a 6-month or less prognosis, like early stage dementia and ALS, can legally use voluntary stopping eating and drinking, as they call it, a bridge to acquire lethal drugs under assisted suicide laws. So as Dr. Rhee said earlier, you know, there's a push for Alzheimer's. Well, in a recent article, proponents already present the case of Cody Sontag, a woman in Oregon in the early stages of Alzheimer's, who started VSED, that is voluntary stopping eating and drinking, on February 8th of 2023. On day 5, Sontag's physician qualified her for assisted suicide on the grounds that she was dying from dehydration and therefore had a prognosis of 6 months or less. Sontag died by assisted suicide and not VSED on day 8. This is a person who had no terminal illness. In a subsequent article, the same authors are clear to demonstrate that both in practice and by the letter of the law, patients can exercise their right to refuse treatment, without which they are, quote, terminal under assisted suicide law, and that VSED can become a valid qualifier to receive the lethal drugs. As a counterpoint in the same journal, a proponent physician asks, but if terminality is determined by a patient's decisions to stop eating and drinking, wouldn't anyone who makes this choice qualify, end quote? The answer is yes. If anyone who's listening has a daughter, a sister, a niece, pay attention. I have daughters. Since when is anorexia a terminal illness? Do you really want some doctor to help your 19-year-old daughter to kill herself? There is nothing in this bill that will protect them. This is already happening in other states. I'm going to offer you a little quote from Jane, an anorexia survivor who was prescribed lethal drugs in Colorado under their assisted suicide law. I was told that although I wasn't yet 30 years old at the time, my doctor would make an exception for me and allow me to die if that was my choice. It didn't feel like my choice. I felt coerced, end quote. That is from a groundbreaking study just out last year in Frontiers in Psychiatry, which outlines 60 known cases of assisted suicide for eating disorders. Colorado now lists severe protein calorie malnutrition as one of the underlying conditions that you can qualify for assisted suicide. There are now 12 cases over time in Colorado with that as the underlying condition. California lists endocrine, nutritional, and metabolic disease. There have been 40 cases of that over time in California, and the California Department of Public Health has confirmed that this category includes anorexia. There is no clinical evidence on eating disorders to determine who will recover and who will not. Women are losing potentially decades of their lives, friends of mine, like Chelsea, Heather, Sarah, Emily, who are now recovered but who might have opted for this if it had been legal then. My daughters are counting on you to protect them, legislators of Massachusetts. Don't let us down. Thank you. And I'd like to just offer the opportunity for any journalists who are with us to ask any questions. Again, we'll be taking any questions via the Q&A. Seeing none. Again, we thank you for your time. Thank you for having an open mind to listening and to thinking about the implications of a public policy that for whatever supposed goods there might be, the harms are just too much and far outweigh whatever those supposed goods might be. We thank you for listening, and we hope that this influences any journalists listening and any legislators who might have tuned in. Again, you can ask any questions or do follow-ups, or any of us are open for interview after the fact. You can contact Bill Pierce at APCO PR to follow up on that. Thank you again for your time. And with that, we'll close. Take care.